Today on the show, I'm actually not sure. All that and more on 20th Century Boy, the show that always keeps you thinking. Welcome to 20th Century Boy. My name is Inside Mike, and this is the radio of my mind. Whoops, I think I got some of the words jumbled up there. Hello. Hey, there was no episode last week, and I gotta say, I think the pod is gonna change. Bam. I know that might be scary, but I've been doing a lot of thinking, and this podcast, like, we're in our 6th year of this podcast. It's been going a long time, and I've said this a few times, like, a lot has changed in 6 years in terms of me being me, in terms of what podcasting is, what content is, all of that stuff. And I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've had heaps and heaps of thoughts, which I want to share with you because you are the listeners. And I don't think the pod is going away. So don't think this is one of those like YouTube videos where it's like, there's like a thumbnail of the creator and they're looking like sad, and it's like, we need to talk in the caption, which happens so much now. But I think the pod needs to change. I don't know if you feel that. I know a lot of people like the pod, but I think here's where I've been thinking. And you may hate this, you may love this. If you hate it, damn. If you love it, great. I think what this pod is going to be, at least for the next little while, and I have always said that this podcast changes with who I am, where I'm at, my needs, etc., is going to be like kind of shorter episodes once a week where I basically just talk about something fun or funny that happened in my life that week, and also reflect on any learnings that I've had that week in terms of like dealing with anxiety and mental health and how pop culture links into all of that, which is kind of what, where I feel like I'm kind of heading. And there's so much to explain, so this might actually be quite long. First thing is, and this might be a big deal, but at least for the next little while, I'm going to stop doing videos for this podcast. Like, there won't be a full podcast video, which I've been doing for a while, so it feels weird to say that. I might bring it back soon, but essentially, I've realized that there's a lot of like blocks on this podcast that sometimes make it difficult for me to do, and I've been trying to streamline the process a little bit. And man, I feel like I've got so much to say. I hope this is interesting to you guys. But basically, like, this episode of my podcast is like about my podcast and the process that goes into it, right? Sometimes what I realize is there's like this creative hurdle for me when it comes to this podcast. I've thought about it a lot. And it's like, I get to a Wednesday or a Tuesday and I'm like, oh, what am I going to talk about on the pod? And I like, from what it's sort of been is I choose like 3 things in the world of pop culture to talk about. I have a little personal anecdote at the top, that's sort of the format, I guess. And what I realize is I think I've outgrown the format. Whereas even right now, I'm talking off the cuff. I have no notes, and I'm just going to explain to these guys who listen what I'm doing, right? And it feels so much easier to me, right? Like, this comes very natural to me. Whereas like sitting down and like almost like enclosing myself in this format that I've created for myself, that sometimes feels like I'm in a cage that I've thrown the key away to. And then I'm like, well, it's my podcast. It can actually be whatever I want. And basically those kind of like pop culture takes that I've been doing a lot on the show for the last few years, which I really enjoy doing. I've now what I was doing is I'd make the pod, I'd do those takes, and then I would cut those takes up as like 5 to 10 minute clips and put them on YouTube. And often those clips would actually do better on YouTube than the whole podcast would in terms of views/listens, right? And I'd be like, oh, okay, like that was sort of the first thing I found. So now, for the last few weeks, I've just kind of been doing those takes as videos on YouTube, and they've been going really well. For example, these are all things I would have talked about on the pod last week, but I was like, last week I said, I'm just going to skip the pod this week and just do some YouTube videos, right? Because I've got nearly 8,000 subs. I make money off YouTube, like not much, but I make some money, whereas, and it's great. And so like last week I talked about Pharrell Williams is making a Lego movie, and I talked about why I think it's gonna be really bad and not work. You know, got nearly 1,600 views. I talked about Jerry Seinfeld and the protesters in Australia, protesters at his show, that got 5,000 views and a lot of, So basically what I realized is these bits of 5 to 10 minute chunks of content do better as their own thing on YouTube. And it started making the podcast feel really difficult because I was like, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that on the pod. I'd rather talk about that on a video. And, I got into this really weird cycle of not knowing what belonged where. And then I was enjoying doing like more personal reflection on my podcast. I've also been writing a blog recently, which has been going like really well for something I just started as like a writing exercise that I wanted to do. I got nearly 1,500 reads on my blog in June. Which is crazy to me. Like, I genuinely can't believe it. I think it's incredible. And I'm so grateful to anyone who's read them. And if you haven't, please go, radiomike.substack.com. And basically, I kind of want the podcast to be easier for me to do for now so that I can focus on other content. I still want to do a podcast, right? I really value, there's clearly a group of people who really like listening to this every week, and I really value that relationship. It's just like the way the podcast is going, it crunches so much time, even like setting up the video, editing it, everything. Whereas if I just go back to just audio, at least for now, it just means I pretty much just record it with like minimal production. And I will still have that stuff, like not this week, but I will still have that kind of stuff. And I think it'll be, 20 to 30 minute episodes, but counterbalancing that, because maybe you're used to 45-minute eps, which I get, but what I think the industry is skewing towards, personally, from being in it and what I'm seeing, is a move away from like podcasts as fully dedicated shows, like I was saying, like formats, and more just like my podcast feed. And I've been thinking about it for so long. I've talked about it with producer Pat and friend of the show, Keelan. More just like a feed for my content. And I've even thought about rebranding my feed to just like Radio Mike or Radio Mike Productions. And essentially like what I want to do is, like any content I make goes on this feed. There's like, this is the weekly kind of thing, but then there's like all the audio from the videos comes on. You can pick and choose whatever you want to listen to. And, that's where I feel like this industry is headed, for better or worse. And I think by staying in the format that I've created, which has, by the way, evolved heaps over the years as well, right? Like, I think I underestimate how much the pod changes as I change. And that's okay. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. I know some people don't like change, but at the end of the day, what I see this podcast, whether it's 20th Century Boy or something else, there is a part of me, and this is something that I grapple with a lot. Like, I honestly, like, really grapple with it. There's a part of me that thinks I've outgrown 20th Century Boy, right? And that makes me sad because I remember, here's a few things I remember. Being like, doing community radio, age like 20, and thinking, oh, you know what a cool title for a show would be? 20th Century Boy, right? I remember going for runs when I was 21 and listening to the song 20th Century Boy by T-Rex and going, this would be such a cool intro to a show. This is it. All the pieces are falling into place. I remember drawing hand drawing with a pencil a draft of the original podcast artwork, which was a cartoon me sitting in front of a big radio designed by Cass Stevens, aka Soggy Savoy on Instagram, right? I remember doing all that stuff. I remember building it and shooting like a trailer and what this podcast was, and it's been 20th Century Boy, but part of me is like, maybe I have outgrown that. I don't know why, but I'm like, maybe it's time for a complete to move away from that and keep the feed, but be like, now it's this. I don't know. I'm still working all this out. It's a work in progress. And some of you might be like, oh man, Mike's on one of his crazy, like, oh, I'm reinventing myself things and oh, I'm changing the pod. Like, you know, I think, as I've said, the pod changes a lot. If you want to hear me talk for half an hour a week, like I still want to provide that for you. And I still want people to write in their thoughts. I still want to like have little segments and stuff. I just don't think it, I think it's going to be a bit more candid. It's going to be a bit more like, here's some stuff that happened this week. Here's where I'm applying it to like how I felt. And here's, you know, stuff like that. Right. And I'm sure it'll grow again and the format will change again. Right. I've been listening a lot to Osher Ginsberg's pod. He does a guest episode like every Wednesday or something, but he does an episode on Monday and Friday that's just him talking about something for like 20 minutes. And I've been really relating to it. And I feel like I'm changing a lot and have changed a lot, right? Like when I started this podcast, I thought I wanted to be a comedian. And I slowly shook that and realized like, I'm not a comedian. I think I'm like funny, but I think I'm more just like a, I don't know, like a content creator / pop culture commentator / writer who does a podcast and does funny stuff. Like Harry Potter and the Boys, my other pod, which isn't changing by the way, is really funny, right? And that's great, but I'm not a comedian, and that's okay. Like I'm not, and I don't think I want to be. So I kind of saw it as a failure that I wasn't that. But it's like, but I didn't want to be that anyway. I don't know if any of this is making sense to you. It's very personal, but I think there is so much sort of admin-y stuff that goes into doing the pod, and I just feel like I can spend some of that time and some of that money on, you know, making video content, which would have been on this pod. And if you've checked that out so far, that's great. You know, I also have thought, so I want to put those videos up as audio on this feed. I also thought it could be cool to, you know, I know like The Daily from the New York Times does their Sunday read where they read out a feature from the actual New York Times that someone has written, like a journalist. They actually just read it out. I thought of doing like the same thing where like my blog comes out once a fortnight. If you don't want to read it, I'll just read it as a podcast and then discuss it at the end. And it's really easy for me to just sit here with my microphone and hit record and start, and there's a podcast, right? Whereas like so much of the setup and stuff it just ends up being a wall for me. And you know what? I feel like, you know, this could be something where like we do this episode and then next week I'm like, oh no, that's stupid, and I never do it again. And I think the main thing for me is like, you guys, if you consume my content anywhere, if you interact with me anywhere, if you enjoy any of this stuff, like I can't believe where all this stuff is. I can't believe like we've done 2 live shows for Harry Potter and the Boys. I can't believe there's like, I hit 9 million views on YouTube the other day. 9 million, which is crazy. And, you know, I'm getting like 100,000 views on TikTok every month, which to me is crazy. Like, honestly, to me, I'm like, oh shit, like people like watch my stuff. People actually consume my stuff. And at the moment, I'm back seeing a psych, and it's been really productive. It's been really good. Go see a psych, book in with your GP, book an appointment with a psych, and just like tell them shit that you think about yourself. It's really good to put it in perspective. And I feel like, and I'll talk more about it next week, I think, but I'm turning 30, and for a long time I felt like I was really far away from being the man that I really wanted to be at 30. And I think until that day, which is just under 6 months away, I want to spend every day trying to get closer to the man I want to be when I'm 30 and beyond, which is being like better, being a better man, being, more self-disciplined and all of this stuff. It's funny, like, here's a topic I wanted to talk about on the pod anyway, but I just finished reading this book. I'm on a reading challenge this year, 24 books. I think I'm up to 13 or 14, so I should get there. And I just finished this book, which some of you may have read. It's called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And man, it was tricky to read, because a lot of these nearly 100-year-old books are tricky to read. And most of you, if you have read it, probably read it at high school. It's like an old science fiction kind of utopia/dystopia. I mean, utopias always end up being dystopias in the end anyway, but it's sort of like, like a look at what the world could look like, right? And a lot of people did it at high school. My school did 1984 by George Orwell. Brave New World is often compared to 1984, and I've always wanted to watch it, to read it rather. I just have never gotten around to it. And finally read it, found it hard, but towards the end it really started speaking to me what this book was trying to say, because essentially in this dystopian future of Brave New World, it's like people are essentially controlled by constant kind of pleasure. Like, these people are constantly experiencing massive pleasure. And like, that's what essentially the whole world is run off, like pleasure. The government gives them this drug called Soma, which is basically like a pleasure drug. They are like encouraged to have, or like it is almost like taboo to be in a monogamous relationship, right? It's like everyone has sex with everyone. It's constant pleasure. Everyone has orgies, all of this stuff. Very, very interesting take on like how a government could control people with pleasure, right? Because I think a lot of us, and like particularly in our 20s and late teens, we spend a lot of time trying to maximize pleasure and dopamine now, right? That's what I've come to see. Like, in this moment, I want to feel good. That I think a lot of us forget to make decisions that will result in happiness later, okay? It's a really easy mistake to make. And in this book, what this book kind of shows you is, because there's this guy who his name's one of the main characters, John, right? He's a savage from outside of this community, and he comes into the community and he hates it, because essentially the point that he starts to make is that he wants the right to be unhappy, because he thinks that constant pleasure actually is meaningless without suffering, and it's suffering that creates pleasure. And I realized from reading this, I'm like, well, this is so true, because like I think we all think that this constant experience of pleasure would be like the best thing ever, so we're constantly chasing it, whether it's through like drugs or alcohol or sex or porn or like whatever vice you can think of, food, all of this stuff. But I think what the point of this book is that even though in our minds we're like, yeah, that's what we want life to be, it's like, it's not that. Like, there needs to be suffering for there to be happiness. And I just found the book so interesting and relevant to kind of where I was at the moment, and how I've been feeling like getting close to 30 and wanting to be a better person, more like just generally speaking. Anyway, this is all very self-reflective and you don't really care, but read Brave New World. It's pretty good. I'll listen to the audiobook. I'm sure it's out there. Anyway, I think this kind of thing is the kind of chat I want to have on the pod moving forward. And I want to do stuff like, sometimes like if I've got a maid over, and we're having a really good conversation, I want to be like, oh, let's do a podcast. This is interesting, and just whack it up on the feed. And you don't have to listen to it. You can just listen to whichever ones you want, because I think what I realized as well is me doing stuff like the movie club with Pat and the world tour with Claire was me almost like, and those will continue, by the way, but I think they were like ways for me to do something outside of the format, essentially, because I kind of felt trapped by the format of what this podcast is. And just right now, I feel so free. I feel like I'm so free from that format just doing this right now, right? And so, just if I've caught up with someone and we're having a really good chat about like content or something, right? And or mental health or whatever it is. Like the other day I was on the phone really briefly with my friend Mikey D, friend of the show. And I was just like, man, I wish you were here because I could talk to you about this stuff for hours. And I was like, we need to do a podcast soon and just have conversations. And I don't know, maybe it's, maybe I'm overindulging, but like, I think that's what I want this feed to be. I've seen a few people say like, I just listen to whatever's on this feed. I like the content on this feed, and that's great. And I think I'm just doing it. Like, this is what I'm doing. I see a lot of people still today, like starting new podcasts, being like, yeah, this is my pod. And I'm like, I just don't know if you can break through with just a podcast anymore. I think you need to be like a content brand. And that's why I'm trying to be across all platforms. And yeah, those are my thoughts. I would really love feedback. Like, reach out, radiomikepod@gmail.com. Maybe for some of you, you're like, no, I don't want this. And we say goodbye. That sucks. I just know, at least for the time being, I can't do like the format of 20th Century Boy that I've been doing in the past, just for now. It might come back. I don't know. But if you want that style content, it's on YouTube. I'm going to put it on this feed probably as well. And I'm just taking it day by day, right? I'm doing progress over perfection, because I think for a long time I'm like, nah, because if I change the pod, I've got to do like a big announcement and I've got to like make a big point that it's changing. But I've realized from a bunch of experience in the last year at least that no, you don't. Like, you can work things out as they go. You don't have to just have everything ready kind of to go. Like, things develop over time, things change over time, things grow. And that's why I'm just doing this today, right? I'm just going, yeah, this is the pod. This is what it's going to sound like, at least. Let's say for the next month, it might be loose like this, and then we will reassess, and that's okay. I love doing what I do. I love podcasting. I love all like the content I make, and the fact that people watch it is just incredible. I'm so stoked with the response to this podcast over the years. It's not over. This is not it's over. As I already said, it's just like, hey, this is changing just because I need it to. And I hope that's cool. Send me a message. Most of you that listen, sometimes I feel like I know you, because like what I've found is that the people that listen to this pod tend to be the people who like are most similar to me. And yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up for this week. This is 20th Century Boy for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love your feedback, as I said. Next week on the pod, I'm going to tell the story of how I broke into my childhood home and nearly got killed. It was a doozy, and there's a lot of learnings along the way. But for now, head to the YouTube. There's content up there. TikTok, wherever you consume me, I will see you there. And thank you so much for listening. My name's Soon Radio Mike, and this has been The Inside of My Mind. Catch you later.